It all began on a humid Tuesday morning in downtown San Francisco when Elon Musk, wearing a plain black hoodie and sunglasses low on his nose, walked into the ornate marble lobby of a federal courthouse, unaware that by the end of that day he wouldn't just be fighting the corporate espionage case filed against him, but would be at the center of a sprawling bribery scandal that would rattle the legal system to its core because while the media outside buzzed about financial disclosures and insider leaks, Elon had started noticing strange inconsistencies inside the courtroom itself, judges ruling against his legal team without hesitation, key evidence being thrown out with no explanation, and even witness testimonies being dismissed before they were heard. And as Elon leaned over to whisper to his lead counsel Russell Greer, who had defended presidents and Fortune 500 titans, he asked, "You seeing what I'm seeing?" And Greer, pale now and tapping his fingers in a nervous rhythm, muttered, "This isn't a trial, it's a setup." And Elon, never one to shy away from confrontation, decided to dig deeper, calling in a favor from Caroline Leavitt, an investigative journalist who had once exposed corruption at the State Department and owed Elon for a private tip that saved her career. And when Caroline began sniffing around the background of Judge Bernard Langford, a man known for his straight-laced record and boring lifestyle, she uncovered something that blew the case wide open: a shadowy trust fund with anonymous deposits from offshore accounts, each transaction timed within days of key rulings against Elon's companies. And just as she started pulling those financial threads, she found out about Langford's vacation to Mexico, which coincided perfectly with a private retreat held by Tesla's biggest competitors, a trip that had never appeared in his public travel records. And while Caroline was compiling screenshots of emails between the judge and a lobbyist named Philip Grayson, who had previously worked with Daniel Forsyth, the prosecutor leading the case against Elon himself was sitting stone-faced in court, pretending not to notice that Forsyth was getting away with introducing doctored timelines and blocked correspondence without a single objection sustained. And that's when Greer received a silent notification on his phone. Caroline's encrypted message flashing across the screen. "He was bought. I've got proof." Going public in 10, and Greer, blinking at the screen in disbelief, turned to Elon and whispered, "It's bigger than we thought." While on the outside, cameras were already rolling, live streams exploding with breaking headlines. Judge Langford implicated in bribery ring involving Musk trial, and inside the courtroom, just as Judge Langford raised his gavel for another ruling in favor of the prosecution, the door burst open with a marshal holding a printed affidavit signed by federal prosecutors now demanding Langford's immediate recusal. And in the stunned silence that followed, Elon didn't say a word, just leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, while chaos erupted around him. And though he didn't smile, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, resolve maybe, or the icy satisfaction of a man who had just watched his enemies blow their cover before the final act had even begun. As the judge was escorted from the bench under the blinking strobe of news alerts and whispered chaos in the courtroom gallery, Elon Musk sat motionless, his hands folded neatly on the polished defense table, while across from him the once cocky prosecutor Daniel Forsyth now fumbled with his notes, sweat dotting the edge of his collar, his previously smug posture collapsing under the weight of what he must have already known was coming. Because as soon as Judge Langford's name hit the national news ticker, the Department of Justice opened an emergency ethics investigation and the courtroom was cleared, forcing Elon and his legal team into a small back conference room where Greer shut the door and said, "We have 2 days before they try to make this all go away. If we want to end this, we need to expose everyone." And though Elon was no stranger to pressure or enemies, after all, entire industries had risen to fight his dominance in EVs and space, what he hadn't expected was how personal this plot really was, because Caroline Leavitt, now halfway across town in a media studio surrounded by live cameras, sent him a photo that stopped him cold. A grainy image of Forsyth seated at a dimly lit table in a high-rise lounge with none other than Callum Reyes, former board member of SolarCorp, the very clean energy startup Elon had tried to acquire before their IPO mysteriously failed under SEC scrutiny. And it clicked for Elon then. Like tumblers in a lock, SolarCorp hadn't gone bankrupt by accident. They'd been burned down from the inside by the same players who now sat behind this trial, using fake shell companies, fake environmental lawsuits, and now, apparently, a fake trial built entirely on purchased rulings and suppressed evidence. And Elon, gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles, said quietly, "They were never after the truth, they just wanted me out of the way." And with Caroline's intel building by the hour, emails, phone logs, even private Jet manifest showing meetings between Grayson, Forsyth, and Reyes in Dubai. Greer called in a private meeting with the Federal Ethics Committee to submit their evidence before it could be buried. But while Elon was preparing to flip the narrative, the retaliation hit, because someone leaked Elon's private emails, not about the case, but about confidential acquisition plans, investment strategies, and internal company movements, suddenly painting him in headlines as secretive, shadowy, even unethical, and Elon knew instantly that the leak came from someone inside, someone close, and the betrayal wasn't just strategic, it was surgical, precise, designed to shift the focus from Langford's corruption to Elon's credibility. And that's when he did something no one expected. He went live, no script, no PR team, just a single camera and Elon sitting in a dim hotel room, speaking directly to the public in a calm voice that didn't ask for sympathy but laid it all out: the judge, the emails, the lobbyists, the corporate collusion, the photo of Reyes and Forsyth, even a screenshot of the internal email from an anonymous whistleblower titled, "We've paid Langford, tell Forsyth to act accordingly." And within minutes of the stream hitting Twitter and YouTube, hashtags exploded, commentators scrambled, legal analysts called it one of the boldest moves in courtroom history. But Elon didn't care about the noise because while the internet argued over his tone and timing, DOJ agents were arriving at the home of Philip Grayson, raiding his office, and by the end of that night, a redacted but damning arrest affidavit for Forsyth himself was circulating in encrypted leaks. And as the sun rose the next morning over San Francisco's skyline, Elon Musk sat alone in a silent corner of his suite, not triumphant, not even angry, just focused, because this wasn't over, not yet, not even close, especially when Greer returned from a pre-dawn call with the DOJ and said one sentence that would change everything. They found a second judge. The room fell into an eerie, motionless silence as Russell Greer's words echoed against the hotel walls. They found a second judge, and Elon, still seated in his chair beneath the glow of a desk lamp that cast long shadows across scattered documents and Caroline Leavitt's now iconic broadcast screenshots, leaned forward with a slow, deliberate breath, already understanding what Greer meant before he elaborated. Because when power moves in silence, it never moves alone, and sure enough, Greer slid his phone across the table, displaying a leaked internal memo from the legal division of the Department of Energy, stamped confidential and bearing the name of Judge Myra Eddington, who had quietly ruled against Musk's subsidiary last year in a permitting case that cost SpaceX 6 months of delays and nearly derailed a launch schedule, all under the guise of environmental compliance. But now they had proof that her brother-in-law sat on the advisory board of a lobbying firm directly tied to Reyes Holdings, and Elon didn't blink as Greer said, "It wasn't just Langford. They've been stacking the deck for years." And as those words hung in the air like smoke from a controlled burn, Caroline's newest drop hit Twitter like a match on gasoline, revealing a financial network of cross-border payments funneled through at least 3 nonprofit think tanks supposedly focused on green initiatives, all of which had received sudden anonymous donations within weeks of rulings that disadvantaged Musk's ventures. And while the public clung to the narrative of courtroom corruption, Elon's enemies pivoted behind closed doors, launching a whisper campaign through key financial journalists who began hinting at unchecked power, corporate bullying, and the cult of personality behind Musk, trying to recast him not as a victim of injustice but as the symbol of it. And it worked, for a moment, until Elon's inner circle discovered something even darker, a sealed deposition from an ex-employee at Reyes Holdings, never meant to surface, where the witness confessed under oath that they had been asked to research vulnerabilities on Musk's team and to flag any leverage, financial, familial, emotional, which meant the war wasn't just legal, it had turned personal, targeted, and Elon's first thought wasn't about himself but about Xander, his security lead, who had gone radio silent the night before after boarding a flight from D.C. to San Francisco and was now listed as unreachable by their internal comms. And suddenly Elon's hands curled into fists because the message was clear. They were sending warnings now, subtle but unmistakable, not just about winning the case, but about making him stop fighting entirely. And even as DOJ officials scrambled to contain the blowback from the exposed judges, even as the House Oversight Committee called for a hearing into judicial ethics, Elon knew they wouldn't stop because this wasn't about law anymore. It was about legacy, power, and money that flowed silently beneath the surface of every federal contract, every grant, every regulation that threatened to shift the balance of the industries he had already disrupted. And just then, Caroline sent another message. This time not an article or document, but a 2-second video clip taken from a security camera inside the underground garage of a downtown hotel. the timestamp matching the night Xander disappeared, and the footage showed a black SUV idling with no plates, its windows tinted, and a man stepping out in a panic before being pulled violently back inside. And though the angle was bad and the resolution worse, Elon recognized the build, the movement, the stance. It was Xander, and this wasn't pressure anymore. This was blackmail, abduction, and pure intimidation. And for the first time since this all began, Elon Musk, sitting beneath flickering fluorescent light with headlines blaring "Musk strikes back" and "corruption exposed," didn't feel like a man cornered. He felt like a man on the edge of something else entirely, and as he stood, sliding on his jacket and grabbing the USB drive with every file Caroline had uncovered, he looked at Greer and said, "Get the plane ready. We're going to DC. I'm not fighting this behind closed doors anymore." And just like that, the man who built rockets to leave the Earth was preparing to detonate the truth right in the center of the nation's capital. As the Gulf Stream descended into Washington under a pale sunrise streaked with red, Elon Musk sat alone near the window, the USB drive secured inside the inner pocket of his blazer, his phone dark by design. Comms routed through Caroline's encrypted network, and as the city came into view, monuments, domes, shadows stretching long over marble, he felt the weight of every enemy who didn't want him to land, let alone speak. Because in just 4 hours he was scheduled to meet behind closed doors with the Bipartisan Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee, a group that claimed to want transparency but had been eerily silent since Judge Langford's arrest, and Greer had warned him on the flight, "Don't expect a red carpet." Some of the people in that room might be the same ones who buried this case in the first place, but Elon already knew that, because this wasn't about hope anymore. It was about leverage, and he had it, in the form of audio recordings Caroline had obtained just hours before the flight, wiretaps from a whistleblower inside Reyes Holdings' legal division, clearly catching Daniel Forsyth on a call saying, "We don't need to win. We just need Musk to bleed out in legal fees and bad headlines." And worse, another voice, identified through vocal recognition as a senior policy advisor to a sitting senator, said flatly, "We can't afford to let him finish the Starlink defense contracts. It tips the balance. We've already made arrangements through Langford and Eddington," which meant it wasn't just about Tesla or SolarCorp or judges on payroll. It was now tied to national security, satellite infrastructure, defense intelligence, the backbone of communication itself. And Elon knew exposing that would be a declaration of war against the deepest layer of political corporate entanglement in modern history. And yet, when the plane touched down and he stepped into the waiting car with Caroline already inside, face pale but eyes locked in, she handed him a sealed envelope and whispered, "There's one more thing." This came from an anonymous source inside the White House, and inside was a single sheet of paper, a visitor log from 6 weeks earlier showing that Reyes, Forsyth, and a man named Malcolm Dern, a former Tesla board member turned quiet critic, had all met with someone whose name was redacted, but the location was clear: West Wing, Roosevelt Room, private access. And Elon's pulse quickened because he realized this wasn't just about collapsing a trial. It was about protecting a decades-long pipeline of influence, and someone inside the highest office in the country had tried to kill the case before it ever reached the courtroom. So by the time he entered the Senate side of the Capitol, flanked not by bodyguards but by Greer and Caroline, carrying nothing but the USB and his voice, the media was already swarming outside the rotunda, and reporters shouted questions like gunfire. "Mr. Musk, are the allegations true that you're weaponizing your wealth? Do you deny working to sabotage federal judges?" But he said nothing, walking straight into the stone-faced reception of a panel that looked like it had rehearsed its disapproval in a mirror, and as the door clicked shut behind him, the room fell still, and a senator cleared his throat before saying, "Mr. Musk, this committee has been briefed on the situation involving Judge Langford. But we need to remind you this is not a hearing, it's a courtesy conversation." And Elon replied coolly, "That's good, because I didn't bring courtesy, I brought evidence." And when he inserted the USB into the conference screen, the room darkened, and as screenshots, bank transfers, voice recordings, and emails began flashing across the display, something shifted, not just in the room, but in the air. A silent recognition that the rules had changed, that the man they tried to bury had come holding the shovel. And midway through the presentation, just as Caroline cued the recording of Forsyth laughing about sabotaging SpaceX licensing delays, the room was interrupted by a knock, and a staffer rushed in with a phone, whispering to the chair, who then leaned back and muttered, "There's been an incident. Someone broke into DOJ evidence storage in San Francisco. Langford's files are gone." And Elon's eyes narrowed, because this wasn't a leak or a hack. It was a purge, and someone was accelerating the cover-up even as he was exposing it. And when he left the chamber an hour later, greeted by flashing cameras and screaming press, he didn't smile, didn't wave, just kept walking straight toward the black SUV waiting outside, where Caroline said, "We need to move." Grayson was spotted in Baltimore an hour ago. He's trying to flee the country, and Elon didn't even hesitate before replying, "Let's go. We're not done until every name on that list has nowhere left to hide." The SUV tore through the wet gray streets of Baltimore with the city's skyline looming like a wall of secrets ahead as Elon Musk sat in the back seat gripping the edge of his phone watching a grainy live stream of Caroline's anonymous source walking through an underground parking garage where Philip Grayson had just slipped past a security checkpoint under a fake diplomatic credential, carrying with him not only the last physical evidence of the Langford payoffs, but, as Caroline now suspected, a blackmail file compiled over years by Reyes Holdings detailing conversations, video surveillance, and compromising material on multiple federal officials, including at least one name tied directly to White House security clearance. And Elon, realizing this wasn't just about escaping justice but silencing anyone who might speak again, told Greer to reroute the driver to the port where private international vessels were still docked under light security, and sure enough, when they arrived just 20 minutes later, under a sky smeared with fog and sirens in the distance, there was Grayson, calm and composed, speaking into a burner phone while a white yacht idled silently at the dock with a foreign flag waving above. And Elon didn't wait for backup or headlines or cameras. He stepped straight onto the slick wooden dock and called out his name, and for a moment Grayson turned, almost amused, as if Elon showing up in person was some final absurd twist in a game that had gone too far. But then Elon pulled out a portable drive from his coat pocket, lifted it slightly and said, "It's over. I have the original transcripts, the audio, the offshore trail, all of it duplicated and timestamped." And Grayson's smirk twitched as he replied, "You think this ends with me?" And Elon answered without blinking, "No, but it starts with you." And then, as if the moment had been waiting to collapse under its own weight, federal marshals appeared behind the warehouse doors, guns drawn, while a camera drone controlled remotely by Caroline hovered overhead, recording everything, live, raw, uncut, streaming to millions. And Grayson, now realizing he wasn't escaping, not by sea or spin, turned one last time and said, "Then you better pray the others don't come for you next." But Elon, walking slowly toward him, "I steady," replied, "Let them. I build rockets for a living. I can take the heat." And within seconds Grayson was in cuffs, the yacht seized, the files recovered, and the story that had begun with whispers in a courtroom ended with headlines erupting across every media outlet. Corruption ring linked to federal judges and energy executives busted. Elon Musk delivers evidence in person. And as the footage spread, so did the fallout. Forsyth was disbarred and indicted. Judge Eddington recused herself before resigning. Reyes Holdings collapsed overnight under federal audit. And even members of the Oversight Committee who had tried to stonewall Musk began facing ethics reviews. But Elon didn't stop there. He went live that same night from a hotel rooftop with Caroline beside him and said directly into the camera, "This wasn't about me. It's about who's controlling the decisions that affect every one of us. And if they can silence people like me, they can silence anyone." And that broadcast, viewed by over 120 million people in less than 24 hours, changed the conversation from scandal to system. And though Elon was cleared of every charge and even offered public apologies from agencies that once attacked him, he declined every settlement and instead published every file, every transcript, every name, online, free for all, because he said, no truth survives behind closed doors. And even months later, when the noise had faded and the news cycle moved on, people still remembered that for one brief, impossible moment, the richest man in the world didn't hide behind lawyers or PR teams. He walked straight into a trap, exposed it from the inside, and left. The door opened behind him, so the world could finally see who was really pulling the strings.